Society.
Strangers. Strangers in society.
Strangers on the internet.
The secret.
Strangers.
Society. Oh, welcome, stranger.
Secret to society. Strangers.
Society.
Welcome to the secret society.
Strangers.
Welcome back to another episode of the Secret Society of Strangers podcast. I'm Lee, here with Josh and Jen.
What up?
Hello.
We're back at it. We're out of our spooky season. We just finished a guest episode the other day. So we are now back to actually new stuff.
Yeah, your regular scheduled programming, huh?
Yep. So we are diving into somewhat of the true crime world. It's a little bit historical, so old-timey reference warning. Also, graphic content warning, murder,
There are axes, yes.
axes, violence against children. If any of that stuff is not your thing,
Is there children with axes?
ooh,
No.
no, but that would
Damn.
be cool.
That would have been cooler.
So if children without axes is not your thing, exit
This is
now.
not the episode for you.
Yeah, come back when we do something pretty. Do we do anything pretty? We don't do pretty things.
Do we?
We did fairies, but they actually
did.
turned out to be like evil.
Yeah,
Didn't we
I was
decide that?
Yeah,
Like,
no,
not
fairies are
supposed to?
100% little evil fucking trickster things.
Yeah, yeah,
There's no way it's like, it can't be all sunshine
Disguised
and
as
rainbows all the
cute,
time.
Yeah.
yeah, no. But we are going up to the northeast of the North Americas. We're going to be in Maine today. Jen's got a
Great
little
lobster rolls.
Yes.
tale for us.
Yes. Yes. I've got my main shirt on. I'm ready to go.
Yeah.
We were talking a little bit beforehand. One thing that listeners will get to know about me, inexplicably, I am obsessed with Maine, with the Northeast in general, really, but Maine is my absolute favorite. Spent a lot of time in, Connecticut. I can't really have driven through it. Won't do that again. But I do love Vermont a lot. I love New Hampshire, and I really, really, really love Maine. So it was a kind of a natural for me to want to pull a historical true crime case from Maine. It is from a tiny town called Thorndike, and it is, for reference, for those that are familiar with the Northeast or Maine, near Belfast, which is a very a cute little town, and it's very close to that. And so we're going to go back to June 16th, 1873. And I do want to just kind of reference, so it's really cool if people, don't know for whatever reason, you can go on, it's totally free, Library of Congress, and look up newspapers that can date back to the early 1700s. They've got those digitized. I say that like they're super easy to read. They are not. Don't do it with your contacts in. Just put the fugly glasses on and dive in, because it's not easy. You got to do a lot of pinch zooming, and
I was going to say, everything's zoomed out to like a billion when I look at that stuff.
Yeah, you will. If you're trying to do a laptop and using the pad and mouse connected, just I feel for you. I pray for you that you don't do that.
And hence.
Yes. So it's quite annoying, I will admit. But if you do go and look up this case, you put in some keywords, you will get a ton of newspapers from Maine and a little bit outside of that. But so there's a wealth of information. But when we especially talk about about historical journalism, you'll see a lot of discrepancies, major discrepancies sometimes in the way things are reported. So just take that with a grain of salt. If you look something up and, I've said something different, who knows? Both could be true. Neither one could be true. But did my best to condense and find the most reliable information about this case. So we are in 1873. Thorndike, Maine is a small farming community. I believe the population today is around the 770 so you can imagine that in 1873, I doubt it was, it wasn't your big metropolis there.
And like you were saying, the reporting is probably based off of that.
Absolutely.
The reporter's just in the mix with all the people in the town.
100%. So that can be a good thing because we get a lot more details than you do today if a major case goes on, but you also have a major hearsay component, and you also have a shock factor. With the Victorian papers love their shock factors for headlines. So it is a nice summer evening, and the neighbors were suddenly called upon at the magical hour of 3 o'clock in the morning. Don't know what it is, about
The
3
witching
a.m.
hour.
They are awoken by a neighbor's farmhand coming on their door saying he needs help with putting out a fire. And that has got to be a terrifying thing. You think of
Bucket brigade, man.
Exactly. So you
no
gotta
water hose in
I
sight.
know that.
no. So that's got to be pretty terrifying, and you've got
And everything's flammable. Like everything is flammable.
Also, whenever like
Exactly.
anybody says Maine or Vermont or anything like that, I always just assume that it's perpetually winter there, because that's just the picture I have.
I know, I
in
get
my
that vibe
mind.
all the time. Yeah.
So, like I said, Thorndike is a tiny town, and John True Gordon is going to be the main character of this story, but he leaves his mark for sure on this town. So John is 28 and was not known, we'll say, as having a sterling reputation in the town. Don't know that he was like Maine's most hated, but he wasn't maybe of the moral character that would have been expected. Right.
Tolerated.
Yeah.
There's old True.
Tolerated. That's probably a kind Victorian way they would have put that. He did work on his parents' farm and was courting a lady named Julia Edwards with the hopes to marry her. And he has a younger brother named Almond, who is 25. Almond has his own family. He's a little more settled, more the family man, probably more responsible. Nothing alluded to anything bad about his character, we'll say. So that'll become important. And so essentially they're all living in this farmhouse that is their parents, which would not have, of course, have been an unusual arrangement at that time. For everybody to kind of pitch in, work the farm. These houses were generally very large. But their parents, if they're in their mid to late 20s, their parents have got to be getting on up in age. So they also they have at least one paid farmhand named Eldon Ward, and he lives also in that house with them.
A full
the
house.
family.
Yeah, there's so
Yeah,
many people in that house. It just reminds me of Home Alone, their house in the beginning of the movie.
Yes. Yeah, and I haven't gotten to the kids yet. So yeah, we've also got some kids in the mix as well. So the brothers' parents had recently named Almond, the 25-year-old, the younger brother, as sort of what you might call the beneficiary of their estate. And that was really in exchange for taking care of them, of his parents, in their old age. So obviously you can tell it would have been very, very rare or unheard of to skip the oldest, especially man in the family. And,
It sounds like he's already got a few things to be jealous about. He's the older brother. He's not married. He doesn't have a family. Like now they're like, oh, well, you know what? You don't have any of these things. We're skipping.
Exactly. So it's already shaping up that clearly Almond is maybe more than responsible brother. And probably who they thought would actually take care of them in their old age. So it's no secret John's not happy about this arrangement and felt that he should have inherited the entire estate, or at least gotten more of the estate than his brother in a split. And I do believe that there were other siblings as well, but they don't really factor in so much to this particular story, so I won't go into all that. But John also, though, was having issues with his courtship with Miss Edwards. That was not going super smoothly for him, and Julia has been receiving anonymous letters about her we'll use fiance in quotes, because evidently John may have considered himself her fiance, but she didn't quite see it that way. And
Jeez,
so,
he is just getting it everywhere.
yeah, he's not nailing it. So basically they're informing her these letters of John's poor character and accusing him of outright crimes. So the first letter she gets is May 7th, 1873. So kind of note the timeline in these. This letter essentially accuses John of robbing Harmon's store of $28, which is really not a tiny amount in 1873 money. So I know I couldn't ever really find anything accusing him of this robbery in papers or that kind of thing, but it did.
So that's like $2,000 plus, like $2,627 in today's money.
So
that's still a chunk of
that's a pretty
change.
good,
Yeah, man.
Yeah,
That's
a pretty
full
good
out robbery. That's grand larceny.
That's
Yeah.
grand larceny, but it's all on hearsay.
Right.
In a letter.
So
In a letter.
The vibe I got though is that pretty much people knew he had done it, but they couldn't prove it. But she gets a second letter very shortly after that on May 15th that accuses him of having multiple infidelities and being a drunkard who would surely abuse her if they married.
Okay.
So this letter in particular also accuses him of being, well, one of his infidelities of a woman with a bastard child. So we all know in 1873 that would have been a huge no-no to have had a child out of wedlock. So we're not sure if the implication here is that the child could be John's, or if they're just sullying his character by saying he would associate with a woman.
The way
that
his
had a
story is
bastard
going so
child.
far, it sounds like this is probably his
So
thing.
you just might as well, the whole thing, everything is this guy's fault.
And we don't know.
You know,
They're just anonymous letters. We don't have any
Yeah.
idea.
exactly. We don't
It's
know,
actually him
but,
writing them.
Trying to confess.
Interesting you should say that. That we'll get to something interesting about that later. But that's not it. She gets a third letter on May 26th, and this letter states, quote, "I have done all I want to do. I have braked up the match, and that is good." So
Is that
that
like
would
the
allude
1800s
you-
equivalent of a drunk text?
it was pretty bad. Yeah, the spelling is, braked, BRAKED, and the match is MACH. But it's interesting because that letter implies that they know they have done some good, and they have some knowledge that maybe this relationship has ended, but John didn't still think so. But either way, and that may or may not be important later. So John has a suspicion as to who is writing these anonymous letters to his beloved, fiance. And he believes that is his sister-in-law, Almond's wife, Emma Gordon. And he definitely did himself no favors by making very public statements to that effect. So he would basically tell anybody that would listen that, she's doing this, she's trying to break us up, these are all lies, and, blah, blah. To further prove this, he travels to Bangor and visits a clairvoyant by the name of Mrs. Toward, or Tord. And I did try to go on a little rabbit hole and see if I could, if she had been famous or anything. Evidently, she wasn't super famous because I could not find a clairvoyant, by that name. But either way, she evidently agrees, and with her powers, she tells John that yes, indeed, it is your sister-in-law, Emma Gordon, that is writing these anonymous letters.
Safest bet in the world.
Yeah.
To ruin your life.
I just tried to ruin your life. No big deal.
Yeah. I'm sure she did hear about this, what happens later, but I don't know, surely she felt a little bit bad. But John also couldn't keep his mouth shut. He'd also been heard threatening to kill his brother. So he threatens to kill the sister-in-law. It's sort of a vague thing. It was something to the effect of, one of us is gonna die by the time this is resolved, this situation, interfering with his fiance. So, Victorian for basically, threatening to kill someone. And so he's doing these things publicly. So we get to the night in question. On June 15th, John's parents are away in Bangor, and everybody else has gone to bed for the night. Almond and his wife, Emma, are in bed with their 17-month-old daughter, Millie. Love that name. And 5-year-old son, Ira.
Ooh, another good name. I like that name.
Yeah, I don't hear that.
That was my
anymore.
uncle's name.
Really?
Really? Yeah,
Uncle
you don't
Ira.
hear that. That's pretty cool.
And was that one of the lights again?
I don't know. Maybe it was a
That
ghost.
was. He's dead, so. Man,
See?
Ooh,
it's weird. Yeah.
You just
it's like, I
Beetlejuiced
like
him.
it. Oh, I love that. I love these old names. Except John. I mean,
Yeah, fuck that guy.
And also in the house are 7-year-old Anna and 3-year-old Eddie, and the farmhand, Eldon Ward. So Eldon is startled awake at the witching hour at 3 a.m. by a child's scream. Other newspapers would say he smelled the smoke first, so take it however you will. Either way, he is startled awake.
Yeah.
And he rushes down to Almond's bedroom with the family and starts screaming fire. And he sees the family in their beds, absolutely drenched in blood. And he assumes that they are, all 4 of them are dead because of the amount of blood that he has seen.
Jesus.
So he immediately runs to the neighboring farm, and he gets some help in the intent to get some help to put this fire out and just help, because what he's just seen. So at this point, while he's heading out, he sees John for the first time. So John actually stops him and tries to keep him from running to the neighbor's house. Eldon, he doesn't listen to him. So
Thank
he
God.
continues on, which likely 100% saved his life and other lives in the house. So the neighbors are able to arrive really quickly and put out the fire. So the fire and the damage is really just confined to the bedroom. That's it. So that's suspicion number 1, because that's not how tinderbox farmhouses work in the case of a fire.
I figured they would just all burn instantly.
Yes. And that's really kind of how it should have happened if it had been an organic sort of thing that had happened. So the neighbors that get there to help out, they've got the fire out. They're immediately suspicious of John. And also a side note that I sort of forgot, when everybody kind of gets back, they see, and obviously they got there pretty quick, but not that back quick, so they just, when they get there, see John running out with Anna and Eddie to rescue them from the house. So that's another thing that they kind of note a little bit later. So while the neighbors are rushing to put this fire out, they're realizing that the family is only really burned at their leg area, like so towards the bottom of the bed. And that's really about the extent of it. So the neighbors and all these people that are now going to be coming are really getting to see the full horror of what has gone on. These bodies have not been consumed by fire or anything like that, at least not the parts that mattered
Right.
for evidence.
And unfortunately, the baby was in the bed with them too.
The baby was. So initially, so the neighbors, as they put this fire out, and then they are going ahead and bringing the bodies out because they don't want them to be, I'm sure they're thinking fully engulfed or whatever.
Yeah.
But in the process of that, they do discover that Millie is still alive, but not for a few minutes. But what they do discover, which is great, is that Eldon Ward had just assumed that Ira was gone, but miraculously he was injured, but he did survive. So especially
Ira.
by 1873 medical standards, he was able to survive. So, but the neighbors are noticing that in their growing list now of suspicions of John, they're noticing he seems to be more concerned with bringing furniture out of the house than necessarily what's going
People.
on with these children. And then I'm sure there's a lot of elation going on about Ira being alive, I would imagine, and probably at least for a little bit with Millie, and so some would argue that furniture was hella expensive in 1873.
That good northeastern wood, they made some good furniture up there.
Yeah.
Some sturdy furniture out there.
John's like, not my
So-
secretary. He's dragging a giant
Just
piece
the
of furniture
whole-
out.
Yeah.
No,
And
no,
so,
no,
you
you
know-
gotta twist it. No, it's gotta twist your way.
It's like, someone want to help me? Guys, you're just staring at me, taking the furniture. Come on.
Right.
Oh, yeah, good thing Ira's alive. Cool. So let me get this fucking desk.
Right. So, and that in a fire, that would not be unheard of for people to help you, if everybody's out and all of those good, to try and help you salvage things. That would actually not have been a super rare thing to do because, furniture and stuff, and it's not easily replaceable. So, so they're kind of just noticing these things. Well, on one of the trips that John makes back in to get, I guess, another load of whatnot, and keep in mind again, there's no sense of urgency to do this. Fire was contained to that bedroom. That was it. They get the fire out. It is not, if you're picturing, a tinder box and every floor is on fire. Absolutely not. People are walking in and out.
So John's just essentially like robbing the place while people are
There's no
investigating.
danger. There is no
It's like,
urgency to get this stuff out. Yeah, that is why pretty much this is really starting to look really suspicious, because it's like, dude, it's literally still going to be there. you know?
Yeah.
Why are you freaking out right now?
It's like you could actually sleep in your house tonight, like kind of thing. So he makes one of his trips, and then a neighbor reports that he really seems to want to make sure that he has someone there, but he does this really super awkward sort of fall. And they
it's all
gather
Victorian and dramatic.
so they gather around him. They kind of help him to sit down in a chair that he probably had plundered out of the house. And but when he fell, and what made it so awkward is they said it was like he was trying to just like fall forward on his face. And this is the first time that people are really coming around him in all of this chaos. So nobody's really gotten close-up eyes on John at this point, to really see him. And so they try to tend to him and, are you okay? And, whatever, all those things. And he just keeps wanting water. So someone goes and gets some water, and he's really making a point to not show himself very well, or his face and things. So they're like, apparently it was super awkward and weird, and to the point everyone's noticing. And so they note that he says, that he's basically busted his nose, and his nose is bleeding, and that's why he needs this water, clean himself up and whatever. So they're paying attention, and he has no blood on his face, but what they do see him doing is washing his hands and arms and things.
John's super
Nothing
slick.
to see
man.
here.
He is very much paying attention to those areas and not his face, and they don't see evidence of him busting his nose in this very awkward fall that he took. So things are still, they're definitely not going well. Also, another thing that came up was they felt like someone had seen him at a water pump, and they felt like he wasn't pumping the water very earnestly. Almost like he's in slow-mo, trying to
Just
pump
let
water to
burn. Why
Yes.
don't you burn?
because you can imagine what everybody else is doing to try and and
Yeah, he's
apparently
sitting there
that
like-
really evidently
What?
being an actor was not among his talents. This is very clear.
Actor.
So it's discovered because of the bodies not going up in flames and damage only being below the heads and things like that each victim has been struck between the eyes with an axe. And
it's like
they
a
had-
weird, like crazy spot.
And they
Like
were
usually you
able
would
to
just
actually,
like do chest or something.
it was very deliberate. That they actually, many of the victims had bruises where the wood part where the axe would meet the handle had imprinted, so he dove it very deep. There was, which is again makes Ira's survival, very miraculous. So
Yeah.
I don't think that the papers don't go into super great detail, but obviously Ira had not been hit that hard, as at least we know Almond and Emma, were his brother and sister-in-law were for sure, which would make sense because they theorize, of course, that he goes after his brother first, which would make sense because he's going to be the main physical threat if somebody wakes up, and then Emma, and then therefore the children. So he is very swiftly arrested, and I can't stress enough how proud I am of these 1873 police officers, having no forensics and none of this stuff and all this.
That was the
Although it
last
makes
time we were
super
proud
hard.
of police.
CSI
It may have
1875.
been. It may have been. So he's arrested the same day. He's done such a poor job he's mucked this whole thing up, which thank goodness, saving at least 3 other lives that were in that house that night. But also his actions afterward, he was just thrown off his game because this did not go to a plan, obviously, at all. So he is arrested and he is taken to jail in Belfast. And so his trial, which you gotta love how quickly things, the judicial system moved. So this is June, so by November his trial is happening. And the number of spectators was so large for this, as you can imagine, that they had to set up a temporary courtroom at Hayford Hall to accommodate everyone. And they
Jesus.
kind of-
I mean, I guess
Nothing else
nobody,
going
they
on,
had
man.
nothing else to do.
Yeah.
Oh and everybody's going to, of course, knows the death penalty, case, and those are going to be very, well attended. We're still in the era of those being a public, usually a public event of some sort. But they did an interesting legal strategy with this. So they have 3 murders that, for sure. So they actually only try him for his sister-in-law, Emma's murder. And so the thought being, if something were to go horribly awry with that, he's found not guilty, whatever, they still have 2 other bites at the apple to make this happen. But you'll probably, see they had some evidence, with the Emma one that was pretty good. Threatening to kill in public, for example, and all those things. So while he's awaiting trial, amazingly, a confession letter appears, and it's interesting because this letter is found like right outside of his jail cell.
Weird.
So it's not Emma.
It's definitely not.
So
Emma.
yeah, it's a very, very long confession letter, but to condense it down as much as possible, essentially the letter states that a man named Charles W. Green had met John and discussed the issue that he was having with his brother and the inheritance, and that he realizes, presumably, that this means that they have a lot of money at the home, And so he plots to go and kill John's family in a robbery attempt, sort of. And so this letter says, when this Charles W. Green, that he goes to commit this robbery, and his plan was to poison the family's tea kettle,
What the fuck?
which makes just zero sense. You can't.
I mean,
make
unless
it
they're
make sense.
avid tea drinkers.
I mean, yeah, I guess that would poison them for the next day when they're.
But how are you pulling that off?
And
Yeah, it's the
or
long
when-
con.
So he's coming in at this ungodly hour of the morning, I guess is what is trying to be portrayed here. To do it for the morning makes no sense. If they're all asleep, then just steal the stuff. I don't know.
Yeah.
Anyway, it didn't go well. It went downhill from here. So essentially it says Allman woke up, and so of course he had to kill him. And then Emma woke up and he had to kill her, and then the children were making noise, and so this Charles W. Green, had to kill the children. Obviously it makes no sense because they're all found in their beds. So did they wake up? No, that makes no
No.
sense. Obviously nobody is gonna poison a tea kettle for a future robbery. It's bizarre.
And you wouldn't start a fire if you then had to go rob the house.
It alludes that, okay, well, now my plans are all messed up, and so I just set fire. But it doesn't make sense. It's terrible. And so that doesn't do well. And then you have to also add in the fact that it was found within throwing distance of his cell. So that's not looking well. And I will give credit, though, during this trial, they actually did try to mimic what he said, which was essentially that someone had thrown it from a fishing line, sort of from outside, and that's to get to him, and it landed in his cell or some such nonsense. They did their due diligence. They tried to recreate that. Of course they could not, because it didn't happen. And that was that but he had,
if you were gonna confess and you weren't in jail, wouldn't you just go to the police station first, or maybe the
Right.
judge's house? You're gonna go to the person that was falsely accused and be like, hey, look, I wrote this for you.
And then just drop it right in
Or-
front of their cell phone.
They-
John.
they did have mail then, too. They could have even done that.
Yeah.
And this wasn't really even the only confession letter. There was another one that they strongly suspected that his mother or another family member had written, but that was easily discounted too. They gave no credence to that either.
You open it up and it says JK to other letter.
But E for effort for John. And so trial begins November 1873. His fiancee, Julia Edwards, she testifies, and it's not clear if this is the newspaper reporters getting it mixed up, because again, I mean, they did a really good job of writing verbatim what people were saying. And opening arguments for this were 2 hours, just the opening, and the state had 50 witnesses to call.
The whole town.
Yes.
Pretty much.
I mean, think about it. Yes. And so this is quite a few people and a lot. And these papers would literally, detail out what people said, what each witness said. So I highly encourage, if you want to look at it, it's very, very interesting. To just for free go and look it up. So with that being said, I know that this sentence doesn't make a ton of sense, but so she testifies that the letters essentially had no effect on her, but she did end their relationship 4 days before the murder. But she also said either on cross or when she was testifying for the prosecution, basically alludes that they had been broken up a lot longer. So again, could be reporting. Truth is probably somewhere in the middle. But the fact of the matter is, she did break up with him, and he's going to assume that it's because of these anonymous letters that she was receiving that he believes
still
are
think it
from
was
his
him sending
sister-in-law.
She's like, no, John, you're just a dick.
I'm done.
I mean, essentially, yeah, because the letters
not
were
putting money on
very
your
long,
books.
longer than the brief synopsis that I just gave of them. But yeah, no, she definitely wasn't. But it definitely would have been super sensational if it was just 4 days before the murders that she did officially end their courtship. But she also testified. Again, she actually testifies in court that she did not view them as a fiance, like we were going to get married sort of thing. So she discredits that. Could she have just been wanting to distance herself from an axe murderer? Possibly. Don't blame a girl for that. But
Right.
or he could have been so delulu that he did think that. Either one, I could see that going either way. So John does decide to exercise his right to testify at his trial. That does
Never
He
a
absolutely.
good
represents himself.
idea.
Jesus.
So he decides to
Why
do
am I not
that.
shocked?
It was in fact a horrible idea. Evidently he rambles on and on and on. Again, you can read that if you wish,
just-
but you won't make any sense out of it.
He just recites
No
his
one
notes,
did.
his confession letters by accident,
Yeah.
verbatim.
Yeah, that would have been great. He does go into that story about meeting. He goes into more detail about this Charles Green character and whatnot, but it makes literally zero sense. And then the key thing that stuck out in a lot of people's minds was he never actually just says, "I didn't do this." In his very long rambling testimony, somehow he never manages to get those words out in any fashion. Doesn't even allude to the fact that he didn't do it. So that's
Wait, what
that's
are we
not a good
talking
thing
about again?
when you're on
Oh
the
yeah,
stand.
that's right.
Yeah, why are we here? What?
Oh,
Axe murder?
So the jury, what acts? Yeah. So the jury takes, I believe it was 90 minutes, and they, probably just got like a free meal in there.
I was gonna say that sounds like lunch.
Yeah.
I don't think there was too much deliberating going on. It's so obvious, if you have the character not super successful by Victorian standards. Certainly, he's in his late 20s. He's not married. He doesn't have at least a legitimate child. And he's leaving a string of women, and evidently he was very flighty. He would go and stay in Boston for a while, and then he'd go here and there. So he's not dedicated to the family farm or to the family. So none of this is looking good for him, especially in Victorian standards. Then you've got his brother that's, got the stability and seems to be a good guy. And then you have his love interest, coming in. He's going to lose her. I can't imagine it was a super... And then he actually says he's going to kill these people. That helped none at all in his favor. So... not sure what he could have said in that rambling, but it would have been nice if he'd at least said, "I did not do this."
Start
he
there.
never
That's where you
actually-
start.
That's a start. Yeah,
Was
it
not
should have
me.
been.
Take
I'm
a
sure his
note from
lawyer-
Shaggy. It wasn't
Yeah,
me.
Yeah, I'm sure his lawyer was, super thrilled at all that. So he is sentenced to hang, obviously, but he's not done with the drama. He's not done with the drama by a long shot. I kind of alluded, there was a confession, one of the confession letters they believe his mom had written, or at least someone in the family. So she does maintain support for him. She testifies that him and his brother were very friendly, that there were no issues at all with this estate arrangement, things like that. She, is not wanting to admit that, and that would be hard. We see this now, even in current cases. We're kids, or adult kids, but still they're kids to their parents, and they don't want to believe that or whatever. And so, you get that. But just to mention, so he is now a condemned man. On the eve of his execution, he is found he's got blood all over him. He is unconscious in his cell. And so essentially what has happened, he had 2 visitors that day before, and obviously someone has smuggled in a knife, and he has stabbed himself in the chest. but he sucks at everything. So I'm sure he was trying to get his heart. He did not hit his heart. So he just did a slow bleed out. And so he's still alive, not doing great. The doctors, are summoned. They are like, he is not long for this world. So they move up the execution by like 11 minutes or something. I think this was like 11:40. They move it up to like 11:49. It was scheduled for noon anyway. But he's not maybe going to even make it till noon.
Jesus.
So the warden, they decide, he's going to die, but hell no, he's going to be executed as the judge's order, and this is, what has to happen. And so that's what they do. So apparently it takes 4 men to get him to the scaffold and get the rope around his neck. He is still obviously bleeding profusely, is covered in blood. He is he's groaning some, making some noises, but he's too weak to even stand. So they're
Death rattles.
having to do all of that. And so a newspaper reporter from the Portland Daily Press described the scene as, quote, "Those who saw the miserable wretch Gordon on that trap will always remember it. That ghastly face with the bright sun showing up its hideousness. The deep groans, the bloody limp form held up by the officers made up a picture of such utter horror and despair as is rarely seen even in the fiercest conflicts of war."
Jesus.
Wow.
So
this guy should have won a Pulitzer.
yeah, he was good. That would have been one of the more reputable papers for sure anyway. And the Portland's Eastern Argus said, quote, "It was horribly suggestive that Gordon should die with his hands covered in blood, the same as they were the night he committed this horrible crime for which he has died."
Poetic.
Yeah.
Karma.
Yeah. And so because the twists just don't really end, John True Gordon was not the only axe murderer to be hung that day.
Who else?
Another case that we should definitely look at covering, that's equally as horrifying and has a lot of similarities. So people that are into historical true crime, they'll definitely know about this because it's more well known than this one was. But there's a guy named Lewis H.F. Wagner. These are the Smutty Nose Island axe murders, and there were quite a few similarities between the two men. So they were similar in build. They were the exact same age at the time of the crime, and still they were the same age. I just wrote that, and I'm like, they're still the same age. And they had murdered victims in their sleep with the axe, and they had known their victims very well. And they both had reputations for being lazy within their communities. Both men also left key eyewitnesses behind, and unfortunately, they would both meet the same death. And so reporters said that Wagner took a full 20 minutes to die after there evidently what sounds like an issue with the length of the rope that was used. And so the graphic details that are printed, in every newspaper about, not only Wagner's very long and torturous death, but also what they've witnessed in the exact same, right before him, with John practically being dead and hung. It created quite a stir. And I was a little surprised, but in Maine, apparently for a long time, there had been some talks about abolishing the death penalty, which, was rare for pretty much any state in 1873 to, start to kind of have those discussions. But it had been a big one in Maine, and these two hangings actually propelled that forward. And so the next year, the governor did outlaw capital punishment in Maine, but not for a whole lot of time. So they
kind of like paused.
Officially stopped them in 1876. but they resumed them in 1883. But it was permanently for real. We're all serious now. Done 1887, and for sure Maine has not had another execution since 1887. Just some other, little tidbits. So John Gordon was buried, they say, in the same cemetery as his family. However, he was placed not with them, in the plot with them, but in a very, far away corner with his gravestone facing away from the family.
Like ashamed.
Yeah. Although, in more recent times, people have gone and looked at the entire cemetery, and they actually can't find the graves of the victims. So now people are not sure if their gravestones were victims to time.
The graves of the victims.
Yeah,
not his
they don't
grave.
see them there. So his grave is definitely there. About the whole facing away thing, they said, yeah, it's kind of weird. All the graves in that cemetery are not normal in rows.
They're just facing wherever.
They're just wherever. So they're like, yeah, not sure if that's really a thing. But he was definitely away from everyone in a corner by himself. So that is true. But so they're not sure, if the graves just were lost to time or if the victims actually were buried somewhere else. There are some Thorndike, Maine folks that have been looking into that. Another, just to, since we're mentioning Wagner, his execution mate, his body likely would have ended up at the local medical college to be dissected by medical students, as was custom in that day for those that were executed. So interesting end for him as well. And the house, you might wonder about the farmhouse. It still stands, and it is apartment buildings in Thorndike, Maine.
Really?
And it is not very far from the
is it
from the
haunted?
cemetery.
Oh, probably haunted as fuck.
No word on that. So they're locals, people that grew up in Thorndike or surrounding it. This is a story that is definitely continues on for the locals, that is talked about. They can remember from childhood people talking about that being the axe murder house. And there's a lot of wild theories, as time does, to those things. And so a lot of locals have done a lot of digging to make sure that they know and have figured out that is indeed the home, and currently still in use today, which I love.
That's pretty cool.
Maine's full of that. All their old houses still stand. So it's
I thought you were gonna say it's just full of axe murders.
Well, yeah, that too. There's quite a few.
I mean, it is timber country. There is a lot of logging, and
where was Lizzie
everybody
Borden?
relied on wood. So she was in Massachusetts, in Falmouth.
Yeah, there you go.
Fall, no. Fall, and another name like Fall River, something like that, Massachusetts. But
yeah, we'll have to cover her too, like everybody else that has the podcast.
Right.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's still fun though to talk about theories, I think, with that, what people think about her guilt or innocence and that kind of thing. But John True Gordon, he
definitely did it. There's no question. Guilty as fuck. He was bad at he was just bad at life.
Yeah. I'm sorry. I just wanted to mention one more thing again, and just for the the Belfast / Thorndike police. In 1873, I mean, they figured out that it was kerosene that was poured on the beds of the victims and nowhere else. So, word to early forensics there. But,
yeah, man.
He did just a piss poor job of everything, quite frankly.
Yeah. But you had said something earlier, which I really do wonder, does that clairvoyant, take any of the guilt of this whole situation? She's like, yeah, it was definitely your sister-in-law.
I want it so badly, and I could not find, and there are more newspapers than I could look at, but I tried to Google her and use her key name in the searches.
Wonder if he's lying.
Well, she would, but I don't know how they would know that she was involved at all if he hadn't mentioned it to someone. That's what I think. I think that he probably
talked a lot.
when he's talking to people like I'm going to kill them, for instance. I think he
Just say that.
probably was saying, I even visited because somebody probably said like, well, how do you know it's Emma? How do you know that? Well, I went to a clairvoyant in Bangor, the big city, and
Gotta
but
be true.
and trying to search her name for like the court records and stuff. I mean, it's mentioned, but she evidently wasn't called to testify that I can find so far. So I'd love to hear her perspective
Yeah.
because I would
That's
feel
a-
bad if I was her.
Old timey axe murder for you.
Yeah.
And unlike most axe murderers and like true crime stories in general, like from the jump, John was not in
No.
charge of this whole story at all.
Yeah.
No.
Everybody was on to him pretty much
Yeah.
within the
He
first
fucked
half
up.
hour.
Yeah,
From
most
the
stories
get-go.
you get like that. Oh, okay, so like this person's like 3 steps ahead. They at least planned this part of it. No,
Yeah.
not Johnny Boy.
And I hesitate because when I first found out about it, because I have every time when I go to Maine, these small towns, I love visiting their historical societies, and a lot of times they'll have local books and stuff of legend, lore, and things, and that's how I find some of these more stories you wouldn't hear outside of the state. And I thought at first I remember reading through it on the plane home, and I thought, this isn't going to be, that interesting, just another, kind of domestic murder, because you could tell, obviously, they knew who did it right away. But then when you brought in the clairvoyant and the anonymous letters and multiple confession letters, and then it just became, no disrespect to the victims, just comical how bad he was.
That's the thing.
It was a story to be told.
I can't get the image of him like moving furniture out of the house
Yes,
while
that was a
like
big thing.
people are like, "What's going on here?" And he's just like,
I gotta get all of this
Yeah.
out.
and it makes no sense, because like I said, you can read the whole trial testimonies of each and every witness of the 50 witnesses, and the house was not in danger of burning down anymore.
no, he's
He's still trying to get
just piling shit up on the lawn.
So you gotta wonder if he's trying to figure out a way to like get injured or something and have
Maybe.
blood, and then he just finally just decide, I'm just gonna fall down.
Fall.
I'm just
I was
gonna
about to
fall
say,
down.
he's like, you know what? This
Yeah.
is not having the effect that I wanted, and it just falls.
Yeah. So, yeah, exactly. But yeah,
Well, nice job.
Yeah, that was cool, man.
I hope
I have-
everybody enjoyed it.
I know a lot of true crime, and I spend most of my days listening to true crime if I'm not listening to like woo-woo shit. And I never heard of this one, so
Yeah, there's not a ton out there unless you dig deep into the archives and things like that, which makes it fun to kind of
nice.
to get
I
talk
love
about,
these little. little
bring these people back to life a little bit and have their stories told. I think it's
historical-
interesting.
Crap.
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah,
for
man.
it. Yeah, man, that's cool.
Well, we are back on track. We'll start having some of our normal fun episodes. Not that spooky season wasn't fun, but
Right.
I am dying to get back into our more woo-woo things.
Yeah, I
I
can't
don't like
wait.
that word woo. We got to come up with another word.
A different word. Yeah.
Woo-woo.
I
Fun.
know,
I like fun.
I know I like woo woo.
I don't
Yeah.
know. I got some things boiling that I really want to talk about, but I'm going to pump my brakes. We will be redoing some topics that we did when we first started the podcast. Now that we have Jen on board, it'll be interesting to see her take on these things. So look forward to that. We just, as the day that we're recording this, released an episode, a guest episode. So go check that out. It was a pretty cool episode. So if you skipped that one, go back and listen.
Yeah, it's definitely worth a listen.
It
Like, those
is.
guys are amazing, and what they're doing is really cool and amazing also.
Yeah. Also, we're gonna have a seasonal special for the holidays. I already had one topic. Jen said she has another topic, so I'm
I
thinking maybe
do.
we can put a few together and kind of do the same thing. Maybe like a 12 days of Christmas.
Oh,
That's a lot
great
of work.
idea.
No, that's a lot of work.
12 days of podcasting.
I'm the editor. I also have to make
Oh,
the
never
podcast.
mind.
Like that's like 24 days of editing for Lee.
Oh, maybe we could go live and do a few.
We could
You
do
don't
it.
have to edit.
I would love to do. I want to do the lives the night before the releases of the episodes. So I want to do like we release on Tuesday for the YouTubes at midnight. Like I would love to come on at like 10:30, 11 and just hang out and talk about what we did on the episode and whatever. But
Yeah.
it's hard to feel like you want to jump on at 10:30 at night after a full day of other shit is the issue. So I'm always hesitant to hit you guys up and be like, hey, I know you've been like working, taking care of kids and shit, but like, you want to bullshit for an hour and a half? Because my answer would probably be
yes
no.
most of the time.
Yeah, no. Now that it's winter and I'm about to get laid off, like I could do those things.
Yeah. Oh, that's good. That's a good point. Yeah, and I have no
Because it's
life
perpetually winter
schedule.
in North
So.
Dakota.
Yeah, you probably have my fur children with me to spend time with them, but that's okay.
Cool. I know
They're
we could
mostly
do that.
quiet.
We'll definitely do that. You have a few more days if you haven't put in your votes for our spooky season special, the Monster Mash. So go do that. And I think other than that, guys, as always, thank you guys for listening.
Yeah.
We appreciate you. If you want to be a guest, Josh,
hit us up at ssospodcast@gmail.com. Also, be sure to like, subscribe, hit that little notification bell. Got all the stuff.
Yep. Comment, hit us up on socials. We're looking for all kinds of guests, so don't be shy. You don't have to have some crazy experience for us to be interested.
Thank you for listening
we just
to
like to
the
shoot the
Secret
shit with people
Society
that
of
have like
Strangers
minds.
podcast.
Yeah.
This show is an
Right, y'all.
independent production.
Keep it strange.
Researched and crafted by our passionate team.
Bye.
But we couldn't do it without all of you. We truly appreciate your support. Embrace the unknown, for not all secrets are meant to be kept. Farewell, strangers.